It's Monday. That means it's time to talk about the box office with Mr. Dan Murrell. Dan, we're going to chart.
We're charting today, Roth.
We're charting, and we have a Predator to talk about that did okay, but not as well as hoped and expected.
Yeah, The Predator was the #1 movie of the weekend. That was as expected, but it opened at the lower end of expectations that were already sort of in the week opening. I think Fox adjusted their expectations. Even still, you know, it depends on who you believe. They had hoped for 35 to $40 million opening weekend.
They were dancing around. They're like, we think maybe.
But
I think what they were really hoping for a while ago was larger than that. But then as the weekend approached, they said maybe
35 to 25. Yeah. So anyway, even the adjusted expectations that came in on the low end, and Roth, that's going to be our main topic later today. Is it's #1, $25 million. That's on par with some of the other films in the Predator series. What does that mean for this movie? We're going to talk about that a little bit later on in the show.
As well as the overall picture worldwide. Now, last week you made a comparison between The Nun and The Conjuring franchise, with The Nun specifically and Paranormal Activity 3, and that bore out this week.
Yeah, we talked a little bit last week about where the Conjuring franchise might go from here, the fact that The Nun had opened so well, but I kind of drew a parallel to Paranormal Activity 3 and that film's performance and what that franchise did going forward. And these two films opened to almost the exact same amount of money, and in their second weekends remained startlingly similar as far as domestic box office. We'll talk about the worldwide in a second. But the Nun and Paranormal Activity 3 had almost identical first weekends. They had almost identical second weekends, including the percentage drop-off. It was 65.5% versus 66.1%. So both of the films opened almost identically as far as box office. They both dropped about 2/3 in its second weekend. Looking at it in context of the Conjuring franchise itself, The Nun had the worst second week drop-off percentage-wise of any film in that franchise, including the two Annabelle films. So not as much as far as back-end support on this film, which is, you know, we talked last week, we both suspected that could be the case given the poor critical reviews, given the cinema score. It is actually performing almost in lockstep with Paranormal Activity 3 right now. That film just scraped over the $100 million mark domestically. We'll see if The Nun keeps up that pace here. But when we look at worldwide, we will talk about some strides that The Nun has made that do not coincide with Paranormal Activity 3. So.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see the total picture. But my hope is that the takeaway from this creatively is the appropriate takeaway, which is you do not have to stay sort of focused on The Nun. There are plenty of stories to tell, potentially within the Conjuring franchise, and maybe just go deliver us another Annabelle creation.
There was some movement.
A fun horror movie.
Yeah, and there was some movement over the week from the producer of the series saying that they are hard at work on Conjuring 3. Some speculation that could be in the works for 2020. Who knows? We'll see. But no signs that they're going to certainly stop that franchise. The question will still remain to be what happens with The Nun. Yes, exactly. Will we see the Nun creation? Or are we going to be going to Crooked Man and whatever they introduce in Conjuring 3 to spin off? So.
I hope the latter. Paul Feig, who is known primarily as a comedy director, did a mystery comedy this weekend. You got the chance to see it. I did not. It did pretty well.
Yeah, A Simple Favor opened #3. Now, you look at that number in the context of Paul Feig's career, just over $16 million. It's his second lowest opening for any movie ever. However, it's also the lowest budget of any film he's ever directed. It had a $20 million budget. It opened at $16 million. That actually was above expectation for what people had for that film. Looking at the cinema score, pretty strong at B+. And then looking at the demographics, reportedly, from what I read, drew 86% over 25. And Roth, we talked about it with movies like Book Club over the summer. When you have a film that draws on its opening weekend an audience that's significantly over 25, that indicates that perhaps this could be something that is going to have legs, that drink your apple juice, but that is going to perform better over time. That's not front-loaded like we saw with The Nun. That seems to be what's happening with The Simple Favor. It held up well from Friday to Saturday. It opened above expectation, and we talked about this with Crazy Rich Asians and a few other movies, is when you have a film with a modest budget, that means that all the pressure is not on that opening weekend or that first 2 weeks. You can sort of relax your expectation and let it play out. A Simple Favor looks like one of the movies that could, in the next couple of weeks, play out, have some room to perform a little bit better as far as percentage drops. And also, like I said, with a $20 million budget, the pressure's off a little bit because you made $16 million back in your first weekend. If you can get it up to, 40, 50, $60 million, then you're looking at a pretty fair return, and that's not even including international numbers. So this is one to kind of keep an eye on. There's another film that we'll talk about in a minute that has done a lot of its business in the back end of its performance and kind of under the radar.
Yeah, and the other thing I think that it has in common sort of with Book Club and Crazy Rich Asians to some degree is that they are serving markets and serving audiences that are not always otherwise served, right? So there's a lot of movies aimed at that's 18 to 34-year-old demographic that are targeted right at, and they are competing with each other for that big smash hit opening weekend, and those are the ones with the higher budgets. These ones that are more modestly budgeted, that have a different demographic, they also have the opportunity over time, when other movies are not serving them, to accrue more and more.
And where, Crazy Rich Asians has been open for a few weeks. A Star is Born, which is the next movie that's going to sort of aim at that demographic, doesn't open for 2 more weeks. So A Simple Favor's got a couple weeks to sort of try to make up some money on the back end. Not that it needs to make up money in the back end, but rack up those week 2 and week 3 dollars and make a tidy profit. So we'll keep an eye on it.
Yeah. Post-McConaissance, Matthew McConaughey appears in White Boy Rick this weekend, which came in at number 4.
White Boy, this was one that was sort of buzzed about perhaps as a movie for awards consideration. It actually cost $10 million more to produce than A Simple Favor, but opened at half the box office. So that's not good news for White Boy Rick. This is another film I think I mentioned last week on the show, very aggressively marketed as far as playing trailers before films. The trailer for this movie has been playing before movies for this entire summer, at least at the AMC's where I usually go to see things.
The only one that's playing a little bit more is
A Star is Born,
which is playing 3 times before a show. So I don't know what the strategy there is. We'll talk about that later.
Just carpet bombing, I guess. Yeah. Just like you complete awareness seems to be their strategy for A Star is Born. But yeah, White Boy Rick, very aggressively marketed film. So this is probably not the result that they want. Reviews were okay. They were kind of right down the middle. Yeah, kind of not where they probably would have wanted that film, particularly one, even though it seems sort of like a smaller movie, like I said, about a $30 million budgeted film. So not exactly the result I think they were hoping with White Boy Rick, but it could find its audience and stick around for a while. We'll see.
Speaking of sticking around, and as we were just discussing, Crazy Rich Asians continues to stick around domestically. Crazy
Rich Asians, number 5 for the weekend. It is going to cross that $150 million domestic mark probably today. It's hanging just under that. Yeah, I mean, not much more to say other than that it's an August phenomenon, and it's the movie that's really closing out the summer as far as racking up that money, which a lot of people thought that might be the Meg. We've had 2 really big August pops this year, which is great after the August that we had last year.
Last year was a little dismal in August. The Meg dominating a little more internationally than Crazy Rich Asians is, but still very, very, very good turnaround. Very, very good for Crazy Rich Asians domestically. And I do not doubt that next year we will be talking about the Meg 2. And I wouldn't doubt if we wouldn't be looking at that. No, maybe not next year.
Maybe not next
2
year.
2 years.
2 or 3 years.
2 or 3 years. And in 2 or 3 years, some kind of follow-up to Crazy Rich Asians. There are a couple other books to address.
Yeah.
Other movies still hanging around. Searching, which is one that we sort of stumped for a little bit.
Searching did something this week that it actually did last week. Searching, again, had the lowest percentage drop in business from one week into the next. In the top 10, it dropped 30%. We talked about when it opened, it was sort of looking to open at 3 to 4 million. It opened at around 6 million. It's now tripled that opening, so it's got a 3x multiplier from its opening weekend. It's looking to cross $20 million pretty soon. So Searching is another one of those. There's a lot of ways, depending on your budget, there's a lot of ways to make money in Hollywood. Searching is a film. It's done about the same. I think it's done more internationally even than it's done here domestically. It's crossing $20 million here soon. The budget we've been looking for, but the budget's reported to be maybe $3 to $4 million. So that's going to turn a nice profit. And I think it's very well regarded. It's been a pretty good word of mouth movie. I know a lot of people on Twitter even still have been saying, hey, I just found it. I'm just watching it. thank you for recommending it. So it's a movie that I think audiences are still finding, which is what you want, because this is the type of film that could find even more of an audience on streaming if it goes to Netflix,
I think it definitely
on Blu-ray.
will. That's what I was just thinking.
Yeah.
Like once it's available on streaming, that's I think where people really discover this movie. But I also was curious, they're not revealing the budget, which is interesting, because I think that the rumors are that it was what, 3 to 4
million, yeah, which is in line with what we've seen for films of this screen life genre before.
So it's already a success story at that budget. So I just don't know why they're not revealing it. Why, Timur? Why? Also out there is Unbroken Path to Redemption.
Yeah, Unbroken Path to Redemption, that snuck into the top 10 at number 10, and it's sort of, we mentioned it last week again with the kind of the faith-based or the faith-aimed films. A lot of times it's feast or famine. This is one that, opened all right. They're usually pretty low budget. There aren't a whole lot of wholesale flops, but for every, I can only imagine, there are 4 or 5 Unbroken Path to Redemptions that just are serving what appears to be, at least with regularity, sort of a niche, smaller market. And then sometimes you get these that kind of bubble up to the top, but more often you get these that they'll open to 2 million, it'll make 5, 6, 7, $8 million.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating thing for me to watch over the last couple of years, where I really think that has been this parallel, the counter to the Blumhouse model, because I think we're all, and then now we have this new Screen Life, right? That's sort of like another version of that, where it's like a modest budget, has a specific target. But the faith-based films, they can sometimes rally the base. Top per screen this week, however.
Top per screen. This movie, I'm very interested. It's Museo. It is the top per screen this week. It played on one screen, made just over $16.5 thousand. This is from Mexican director Alonso Ruiz Palacios, which is an amazing name. It stars Gael Garcia Bernal as part of a team attempting a museum heist in Mexico City. This competed at the Berlin Film Festival. It won the writing award there. But Roth, we've talked about Amazon. We've talked about MoviePass when it was buying and apparently is still buying and distributing films. These kind of non-traditional distributors taking on the film industry. This is actually being distributed by YouTube, which is one of the first films that I can remember YouTube being a distributor on. I think that's actually not YouTube. That's another company that I'm thinking of. But they are going to put this out in limited theatrical release, and then this movie is going to be made available on YouTube Premium after it runs in theaters. I think there's a Los Angeles opening in a week or two. It's opening in a few other cities. But yet again, we see another avenue towards release where this film is not going to be in wide release in the traditional sense, but in another sense will be available to so many people through a third-party platform that's not going to see it in the theaters. And is this a new paradigm? Is YouTube now going to join the Amazon studios and everything else?
They've been trying already. I mean, and they have a model that's not dissimilar to what Amazon did.
Yeah.
Where they have Cobra Kai, and they have a couple of like premiere television shows that they have been using to try and draw an audience. And then they've gone out to festival and picked up some prestige films and are releasing those as well. And it was not unlike, a few years ago, Amazon picked up, of course, Manchester by the Sea, which ended up being nominated for Academy Award, and things like that. So where that goes in the long run, I'm not sure. I am of the mind that eventually the consumer will rebel against all of these multiple streaming services, and someone needs to sort of win, or we just go back to a cable-like system of bundles.
It's going to be a different cable system.
It's just going to be a different cable system in the sense that, sure, we've cut the cords, but now we're doing bundles. But we'll see where it ultimately goes.
Sure.
In the world, The Predator and The Nun were battling it out.
Yeah, I mean, this, a lot of people thought this would be a blowout, but actually The Predator and The Nun were pretty close for the top 5 this weekend worldwide. A lot of it kind of owing to the fact that it didn't do as well here in the U.S. as perhaps the studio would have wanted it to. The Predator also opening day and date in almost all of its international markets. So, it's not like this is one of those things where, it's got a big pop and it's opened in 12, 13, 14, 15 markets, but it's got, it's rolling out progressively week by week. Almost all of its major markets were open this weekend. So this is going to be the big surge for The Predator. The budget on this, $88 million. Like I said, we're going to talk about it in a second, but even worldwide, I think Fox would have wanted a bigger opening for the film, given the number of markets it was opening in, not least of all being the North American market. And The Nun, it's past $225 million in 2 weeks worldwide. And that's where, when I talked about the fact that it's paralleling very well to Paranormal Activity 3 domestically, internationally and worldwide, it has actually already surpassed the worldwide gross of that film.
Which means we may see more nuns.
Exactly. So if we see more nuns, it's more than likely because it is a much stronger hit worldwide than it necessarily is in North America, which that's not unusual considering that the way that the market has been. We got a Pacific Rim sequel because Pacific Rim was much more popular overseas than it was here in North America. We're seeing films like this get greenlit because of their worldwide appeal. So if we do see more of The Nun, I think it's going to be thanks to these other markets that have boosted it and not necessarily how it performs.
Well, even if we see more of it, I hope we see a better version. Meanwhile, Elstorm, Hong Kong crime movie.
Yeah,
thriller.
Elstorm, just solely off its Chinese release, comes in at number 3. This is the third in a series of Hong Kong crime films, following Z Storm and S Storm. I feel like this show is an S Storm sometimes.
This show isn't. Maybe our morning show a little bit.
Yeah, you never know when an S Storm is going to break out here at ScreenJunkies News. And then, number 4, Simple Favor. That's driven mostly by its domestic release here. And then Mission Impossible Fallout
man.
keeps chugging along.
It's doing it.
It's doing it.
It's doing it. Like, this is going to end up, I think this is quietly becoming, like, well, we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
We'll talk about what it's quietly becoming.
Yes, we shall.
But it's impressive and very, very cool, and good. You know, because you want to see a good movie.
It's great that a good movie's doing so well.
You know what I mean? It's a sad thing for us to say that we're excited that a strong film is performing well financially, but that's where we are. Yeah. So let's take a deeper dive on The Predator and what this weekend really means for this franchise. Do people want more Predator movies? Is a question that I think maybe should have been asked.
That's maybe it's too late to ask that question, but sure. First of all, let's look at how it did when you compare it to the rest of the movies that the Predators have been involved with. It opens right in the middle. It opens at number 3 as far as the franchise. Alien versus Predator is still number 1, but The Predator, and Predator, this is the most confusing naming conventions for any franchise ever. The Predator and Predators opened almost within about $100,000 of each other. Now, on one hand, you can say, well, that's pretty consistent. On the other hand, however, that's not such great news because Predators cost about $40 million to produce, while The Predator cost over twice as much, reportedly about $88 million. So it's not a one-to-one comparison because The Predator cost twice as much as Predators. So for it to open at the same level, not the result that you want. Now, Predators went on to make $127 million worldwide, which when you're budgeted at $40 million, that's 3 times your budget. That's not bad. However, if The Predator follows that track and tops out at about $125 million worldwide, that's going to be, $40 million over the initial budget. We've talked about on the show, generally the bottom line that you're looking for especially a movie of that scale to be a success is 2 times your budget internationally, sometimes 3 times depending on how much the budget is. So
and also the depending on how deep the marketing pockets went.
Exactly.
As well.
And The Predator was another one that was very aggressively marketed, lots of trailers, lots of posters. They had a presence at Comic-Con. Like Fox was really, really, really pushing this movie. The reported reshoots, which I'm surely ballooned the budget up higher. But again, it's another case of how important budgeting can be with a movie. Predators at 40, The Predator at 88. How the same performance can look through a different lens. They both had the exact identical C+ cinema score, so the audience didn't really seem to react to either one of them more strongly over the other. The one huge market that The Predator has not yet opened in is China.
Yeah.
Now, there are rumors of a release date. There are, it's been submitted for a release date. However, the film has not yet received a release date in China. The other thing I wouldn't just automatically say it's going to make up a lot of ground in China is because, from my research, no Predator movie has ever played in China. So it's not a well-known franchise there. We've seen what happened to Star Wars, which is not a well-known franchise there. It did not perform very well. The closest analogy that I could see was that Alien Covenant was released in China. It made about $45 million there. So there's the potential for it to make some money, but I wouldn't say it's a slam dunk that if it gets a Chinese release date, that might make up some of the ground.
Yeah.
There's still some big question marks. Now, much like we did with the Nun this week, what we're going to want to look at with the Predator is how it does in week 2. Predators dropped 71% in its second weekend, but it opened in the middle of the summer, and that second weekend was against the opening of Inception.
Right.
The Predator's not going to have that kind of competition this
Eli
weekend.
Roth's The House with the Clock in the Walls will not be an Inception.
No, that's not going to be an Inception-sized opening. So the Predator, I think, certainly has more room to avoid a drop-off like that. But what it does this weekend, I think, is going to be a huge factor in determining what its long-term success is. And it only has a couple of weeks before Venom hits on October 5th, which is going to be competing for almost exactly that same market. Even kind of similar, kind of a dark, horror-ish action type of feel, at least from the trailers.
And it looks similar. I mean, look, you know what? I'm not going to prejudge Venom in terms of the quality because we'll wait to see the film.
Yeah.
And we'll see if it's a good film or not.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't always matter, as we know, in terms of how a film does financially. However,
Mm-hmm.
in the case of a film like, I actually think it matters more for the Predator
Mm-hmm.
than Venom, because Venom's going to have a built-in curiosity factor. It has a built-in audience in terms of people that are fans of the comic books and Spider-Man and so forth. But the Predator is one of those franchises where I feel like Fox had it and felt like they should do something with it.
Right.
But the question of the appetite that there really was for multiple Predator films, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how this bears out in the end.
I mean, at a lower budget, I think it's possible that we could be looking at this opening and saying like, okay, well, you know, with a few qualifiers, it's not a disappointment. But at an $88 million budget line, number one, for the performance of this movie, that's not where they'd want it to be. And then going forward, because this is a film that very blatantly sets up a sequel, I don't think it proves an audience interest in a sequel going forward.
I think you just raised one of the biggest flaws in the film, is that it ends in a way that films of this era, I think, are too smart to do unless you're a Marvel movie, which is to blatantly set up the next film, which in some ways, whether you think that could be an interesting film or not, is diametrically opposed to what the Predator has ever been, and sort of promises a brand new, different story. You could have, at a $30 million budget, made a film that really harkened back to the original Predator and was sparse, you know, in terms of its use of the Predator, and probably would have been a better movie. That probably, because it was a better movie, would have had a better performance. So
excess was what this film had going for it.
It suffers from mania of excess. It's a manic movie.
I think if I were Fox and if I were an executive saying, where does the Predator franchise go from here? Looking at what the audience interest was for this film and everything you threw into it, there's only one call I think that you can make at this point to continue the Predator franchise and say, I have confidence that an audience is going to show up to see this, and that is to call Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yes.
And say, let's go back to the jungle. I'm not saying that's a good idea, but if I were a Fox executive, I think that would be my only scenario where I'm saying, like, I don't know how else to deliver an audience to this thing unless we scale it, cut the budget in half, and even then, I would say you've got to have another hook in it, because they've already sold the Predator iconography. They've already sold the Predator images, the monster shots. That's already been sold for this film. What do you got next? I think that bag might be empty.
And you know what? The truth is, that first film, which you and I both really love, the Predator wasn't the star of it. I mean, it was the inciting incident. It was the tidal wave. It was the force of nature. It was Jaws and Jaws. But the star was Arnold.
It was Arnold, yeah.
So in any event.
Onward.
Let's talk about Mission Impossible in the summer movie report.
Yeah, summer movie report. I know we're in September, but we're going to update this thing as the rankings kind of shift. So Mission Impossible jumps into the top 5. Mission Impossible domestically now a top 5 summer 2018 movie. Bumps Ant-Man and the Wasp down a peg, bumps Solo down a peg. Crazy Rich Asians jumps up 1 to number 9. Ocean's 8 has still got a stay of execution, but the Meg is just lurking right below that screen, about to chomp it up off the list. So Ocean's 8's not going to be there for much longer. But yeah, looking at the summer now, 2018, Mission Impossible will now be one of the top 5 domestic grossers of the summer. It's officially now the highest grossing domestic Mission Impossible film. So, you know, again, but it does kind of establish the ceiling for this franchise, I think, because this had great reviews. You had obviously you've got the Tom Cruise factor. You had a very big buzzy star in Henry Cavill, as far as, you know, this GIF and everything. I feel like the cast was very buzzed about it. Mustache Gate. It was the culmination of all of these storylines. I feel like the hype machine and the good buzz machine was as high as it's going to be on this particular Mission Impossible film. It's going to top out at around 220, 230, which is great. But again, if I were Paramount, I wouldn't necessarily take the wrong lesson and say, like, we're going to dump $400 million into the next one, because it has shown, like, as well as it's done here and as well as it's done internationally, this is also sort of the peak of I think, how, I mean, and just the quality of the film as well. Who knows if the next one's just going to actually be as good as this film was. So if I were Paramount, absolutely, yes, keep making Mission Impossible movies. The audience interest is there, but I would say be reasonable, because that ceiling does still exist as far as it didn't make $300 million or $400 million domestically, but it still performed well, largely because they did sort of keep things in check. And I hope that they don't indulge their worst instincts and sort of say, all right, we're going to throw even more, because that's where you get into trouble again. That's what happened with Transformers.
Yeah.
So I hope they don't do the same with Mission Impossible.
I hope they don't as well. And I think also necessity is often the mother of invention, and more money doesn't necessarily and often doesn't make for a better movie. Yeah. But Mission Impossible worldwide is also doing very, very well.
Yeah, yeah. If we look at the let's look at the worldwide chart. It is now officially a top 5 worldwide hit for 2018, $760 million. It leaps over Deadpool 2. So you've got 3 superhero films, dinosaurs and Tom Cruise. That's not too bad. Then you got 2 more superhero films over on the other side, 2 from China, and Ready Player One, which is hanging around there. So we got 10 plus $500 million hits for the worldwide box office so far. And it's just going to keep growing, Roth, because we've got some big heavy hitters still to come. In the next few months, we'll see if Venom can jump up there. Yeah. We'll see how Mary Poppins does. We'll see. I mean, I think that might be one that's driven a little bit more by domestic box office, but we've got Aquaman, we've got Bumblebee. We have so many things that are still yet to play out.
I know. A lot to look forward to this summer. This is kind of a quietish weekend in the sense that what we've got coming out is, again, as mentioned, Eli Roth's A House with a Clock in the Walls. Not the Goosebumps, as you call it.
I call it not Goosebumps. Here's why I call it. My girlfriend and I were movie pass / A-list folk, and every time the House with a Clock in its Walls trailer would come up, it would be Jack Black in a creepy house and pumpkins, and like, I think there's a mannequin in this too. I don't know. I get them all mixed up. But like, every time we thought it was Goosebumps 2, because there's also a Goosebumps 2 coming out, and the first one had Jack Black in it, so we had to keep reminding ourselves that this was not Goosebumps.
Yes.
So that's kind of what we call House of the Clock in its Walls, is not Goosebumps.
Not Goosebumps, and
which will be coming out later.
That is coming out later this in about pretty soon.
A couple has to be in a couple weeks. Yeah.
Weeks. What JTE calls this year's Book of Henry, Life Itself. I have not seen it yet.
I haven't seen it either. The early reviews have not been great, but I have not seen Life Itself. I'm not a watcher of This Is Us, so I am not really familiar with Dan Guterman. Guterman?
Yeah, and I am a watcher of This Is Us, and so I have a pretty good sense of where, if that went, just This Is Us is a show that really walks a tightrope and often falls to the side of, when it's well done, it's the exact kind of melodrama that is wonderful to eat up while you're watching a television. And every once in a while it falls the other way. Yeah. And so if you've got a movie that falls the other way versus an episode, because you can do it in an episode, right? You got 20 of those. If it's in a movie, then you're in the Book of Henry land.
Yeah. Oh boy. Well, I mean, that was certainly one of the most unique movie-going experiences in my life.
I haven't seen it, so I can't say that.
Well, I might check it out this weekend.
I'm going to check it out.
Also opening on 1,500 screens, Michael Moore's newest documentary, Fahrenheit 11/9. The original Fahrenheit 9/11, I believe, is the highest-grossing documentary in U.S. history. This one not arriving with the same amount of hype as that one did, so I think there might be a little bit of an element of preaching to the choir at this point with it. I don't know. I've heard some stuff from the festival circuit, but I've not. Again, this is a movie that I'm not really that intimately familiar with, other than I have an idea of what will be said.
I have an idea of what will be said. I think everybody has an idea of what Michael Moore will have to say on these things.
Yes.
And I think that we're also, if I were to wager, I guess I haven't seen the film, so again, I'm not I have no judgments on it. I have not seen it. That said, we are living in a culture in which, to your point, it's already incredibly divided. And it's sort of like Twitter has taken the place of Michael Moore.
It really has.
You
That sort
know?
of political firestorm that he started with Fahrenheit 9/11 back in 2004
Yeah.
exists.
Or even Roger and Me
Yeah.
and Bowling for Columbine, these sort of scathing looks at our culture are done on a daily basis. And frankly, I think people are maybe a little tired. Maybe a little tired.
Are they thirsty for it, or are they
is there
just
an appetite?
exhausted
Or do they just want to go to the theater
and
sort
watch
of-
the clock in the house's walls?
We'll find out.
We'll find out.
We will find out
Who knows?
next Monday on Charting with Dan when we look at how the box office ended up.